Keep your hands where I can see them. Officer Daniel Reeves shouted through the rain before Naomi Carter even had time to lower her window all the way, and somehow, in that single moment beneath the flashing red and blue lights, the empty highway in rural Georgia suddenly felt smaller than a prison cell. The storm had rolled in hard just after 2 a.m., turning the Tulane Road into a river of reflected sirens and blurred headlights. Naomi sat frozen behind the wheel of her aging silver Honda Accord, both hands trembling lightly against the steering wheel as cold rainwater crawled down the cracked edge of her windshield. Her hospital scrubs were still wrinkled from a 16-hour shift at St. Mary's Veterans Medical Center, and the exhaustion behind her eyes made every flashing light feel sharper than it really was. Officer Reeves stepped closer to the driver's side door, one hand resting near his belt while rain soaked through the shoulders of his uniform. His jaw was tight, impatient, the kind of face that already looked angry before a conversation even started. "License and registration," he demanded. Naomi nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. It's in my purse." Slowly, Reeves snapped. His flashlight beam swept across the inside of the car, bouncing off paper coffee cups, a folded gray jacket, and a thick manila envelope resting carefully on the passenger seat beside a small American flag folded into a triangle. Naomi reached carefully into her purse. "I'm sorry if I was speeding," she said softly. "I just got off work." Reeves didn't answer. Rain hammered against the roof hard enough to drown out the distant thunder rolling somewhere over the pine trees. Naomi handed over her license with slightly shaking fingers. Reeves glanced down at it, then back at her. "Naomi Carter," he muttered. "You been drinking tonight?" "No, sir." "Then why are you nervous?" Naomi swallowed. "Because there's a gun pointed at my car." For a second, the air between them changed. Reeves stared at her through the rain, expression unreadable beneath the spinning patrol lights. Then his eyes shifted toward the passenger seat. "What's in the envelope?" Naomi looked over instinctively. "Documents." "What kind of documents?" "Personal ones." "Open it." Naomi hesitated only because her shoulder suddenly tightened with stress. "Sir, I'd rather not open private paperwork on the side of the road." Reeves took a slow step closer. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Naomi blinked hard. "What? Step out of the vehicle?" His voice echoed across the empty highway. Somewhere in the darkness, tires hissed across wet pavement as another car passed without slowing down. Naomi carefully pushed the door open and stepped into the rain. Cold water soaked through her sneakers instantly. She raised both hands slightly, trying to stay calm while Reeves circled around her vehicle with his flashlight. "Do you have anything illegal in this car?" he asked. "No, sir." "Weapons?" "No." "Then why are you protecting that envelope?" Naomi looked toward the passenger seat again, and for the first time her calm expression cracked just enough to reveal genuine fear. "Please," she said quietly, "just don't lose it." Reeves narrowed his eyes. "Lose what?" Naomi opened her mouth to answer, but at that exact moment another flash of lightning split across the sky above the trees, illuminating the folded military flag inside the car bright enough for Reeves to finally notice it. The rain kept falling. The highway stayed empty, and somewhere far behind the storm clouds, something bigger than either of them had already started moving. Officer Daniel Reeves stood motionless beside the open driver's side door as rainwater dripped from the edge of his flashlight onto the soaked asphalt below. The folded military flag resting on the passenger seat suddenly changed the atmosphere around the entire stop. It was no longer just another late-night traffic pull over on a forgotten highway outside Savannah. Naomi Carter could feel it in the silence that followed. Reeves adjusted his posture slightly, eyes narrowing as he looked deeper into the car. "Who does that flag belong to?" he asked. Naomi folded her arms against the cold wind. "My brother." Reeves glanced at her again. "Military." Naomi nodded once. "Navy." Thunder rolled low across the distant sky, while headlights from an 18-wheeler swept past them for half a second before disappearing back into darkness. Reeves stepped closer to the passenger side window and shined the flashlight directly onto the manila envelope. Several names were handwritten across the front in black ink. Beside them sat a silver trident pin scratched from years of use. Reeves frowned. "Why are there 30 names on this?" Naomi hesitated. Her wet curls clung against her cheeks as rain slid down the side of her neck. "They are families." "Families of who?" Naomi looked away toward the empty highway. Men who did not come home. Reeves stayed quiet for a second longer than before. Something in her voice no longer sounded defensive. It sounded tired. Deeply tired. The kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. He carefully opened the rear passenger door and swept his flashlight across stacked medical folders, blankets, bottled water, and several white paper bags from a diner off Interstate 95. "What is all this?" he asked. "Supplies," Naomi answered softly. "For veterans." Reeves shut the door harder than necessary. "You expect me to believe you drive around at 2 in the morning delivering care packages?" Naomi met his stare directly for the first time. "One of them is dying." The rain softened slightly, becoming a steady hiss against the trees lining the highway. Reeves looked back at the envelope again. "Who?" Naomi swallowed before answering. "Marcus Reed, former Navy SEAL. Terminal lung cancer." Reeves stared at her face, trying to determine whether she was lying, but the emotion in her eyes was too calm to fake. "And the rest?" he asked quietly. Naomi rubbed her freezing hands together. "Widows, parents, kids." Reeves looked down at the ground for a moment, then toward his patrol car where the dashboard computer still glowed faint blue through the windshield. "You know, most people get nervous when police stop them because they are hiding something," he said. Naomi gave a small, tired smile that vanished almost instantly. "Black people get nervous because sometimes surviving the stop feels uncertain." The words landed harder than Reeves expected. He shifted his jaw but did not answer. Somewhere behind them, another flash of lightning illuminated the wet road and reflected across Naomi's hospital badge hanging from her scrub pocket. Reeves noticed the logo immediately. St. Mary's Veterans Medical Center. His expression tightened slightly. "You work there?" Naomi nodded. "Night shifts mostly." "Doing what?" "Grief counseling." Reeves looked surprised despite himself. Naomi lowered her eyes toward the folded flag inside the car. "Most soldiers come home with wounds people cannot see," she said quietly. "Some of them just need somebody to stay long enough to listen." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. The rain continued falling softly around them, while the patrol lights painted the highway in waves of red and blue. Then suddenly Reeves's radio crackled sharply against the silence. "Unit 12, come in immediately." Reeves grabbed the microphone automatically. "Go ahead." Static filled the line for a second before dispatch answered in a tense voice. "You need to return to the station. Right now? There are military officials here asking questions about a woman named Naomi Carter." The words from dispatch seemed to hang in the cold air long after the radio went silent. Officer Daniel Reeves stared down at the microphone in his hand while rainwater slid slowly from the brim of his cap. Naomi Carter remained standing beside her car with her arms folded tightly against the wind, watching him carefully but saying nothing. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the soaked highway in long streaks of red and blue that looked almost unreal beneath the storm clouds. Reeves cleared his throat. "Military officials?" he repeated into the radio. "Who exactly is asking?" Static crackled for a second before dispatch answered again. "I do not know, Reeves. Chief wants you back here immediately." The line went dead. Reeves lowered the microphone slowly. For the first time that night, uncertainty crept visibly across his face. Naomi noticed it immediately. It was subtle, a slight tightening around the eyes, a hesitation in the jaw, the kind of expression people wore when they realized a situation might be larger than they first assumed. Reeves looked toward her again. "You did not mention military connections." Naomi blinked against the rain. "You did not ask." Reeves exhaled sharply through his nose. "Who are these people?" Naomi shook her head once. "I honestly do not know." "You expect me to believe that?" "I stopped trying to convince people of things a long time ago." Her voice stayed calm, but the exhaustion behind it felt heavier now. Reeves studied her face under the spinning lights. She did not look dangerous. She looked worn down, like someone carrying too many memories for too many other people. He glanced again at the folded flag inside her car. "Your brother was Navy?" Naomi nodded slowly. "Chief Petty Officer Elijah Carter." Reeves recognized the tone immediately. Pride mixed with grief. The kind that never completely leaves. "He died overseas?" Naomi looked toward the dark trees beyond the highway. 7 years ago. Thunder rumbled low across the sky again. Reeves shifted his weight uncomfortably. "I am sorry." Naomi gave a faint nod, but did not respond. For several seconds, only the sound of rain filled the empty road between them. Then Reeves looked back toward his patrol car, and made a decision. You are going to follow me back to the station. Naomi frowned slightly. Am I under arrest? No, then why? Reeves hesitated. Because I need answers before my chief starts asking questions I cannot explain. Naomi looked down at the envelope on her passenger seat through the open car door. I need to deliver those papers first. Reeves shook his head immediately. Not tonight. Naomi's expression tightened for the first time since the stop began. Those families have been waiting weeks for benefit approvals. That is not my problem right now. Naomi looked directly at him. It becomes your problem when people stop feeling human to you. Reeves opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out immediately. Somewhere far down the highway, lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating Naomi's hospital badge clipped against her dark blue scrubs. St. Mary's Veterans Medical Center. Grief Counseling Division. Reeves noticed how worn the edges of the badge looked, like it had been handled thousands of times by exhausted hands. Naomi stepped closer to the open car door and carefully picked up the folded military flag from the passenger seat. Her movements were slow and respectful, almost ceremonial. Reeves watched silently as she held it gently against her chest to protect it from the rain. My brother carried this during his final deployment, she said quietly. After he died, his team brought it home to me themselves. Reeves felt something shift uncomfortably in his chest. His team? Naomi nodded once. Every year they still check on me. Reeves stared at her for a long moment as pieces of the night slowly began connecting in ways he no longer liked. Then suddenly another patrol unit appeared at the far end of the highway, headlights cutting through the rain as it sped toward them much faster than normal. Reeves turned instinctively toward the approaching vehicle, while Naomi stood completely still beside her car, holding the folded flag close against the storm. The second patrol car slid onto the shoulder with water spraying from its tires as red emergency lights cut violently through the rain-soaked darkness. Officer Daniel Reeves instinctively stepped back from Naomi Carter's vehicle while the new cruiser stopped several feet behind his own. The driver's side door opened immediately, and Sergeant Colin Mercer climbed out into the storm with a tense expression already written across his face. Unlike Reeves, Mercer did not look angry. He looked worried, deeply worried. Rain pounded against his jacket as he walked quickly toward them, one hand pressed against the radio on his shoulder. Reeves, he called sharply over the weather. What exactly is happening here? Reeves straightened slightly. Routine traffic stop. Mercer looked toward Naomi standing beside her car holding the folded military flag carefully against her chest. The moment he saw the flag, his face changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. His eyes shifted immediately back toward Reeves. This is Naomi Carter. Reeves nodded once. Yeah. Mercer cursed quietly under his breath and rubbed rainwater from his forehead. Chief has 3 calls coming in from Naval Command already. Reeves blinked. Naval Command? Naomi lowered her eyes slightly, almost embarrassed by the attention. Mercer looked at her carefully now. Ma'am, he said respectfully. Is there any reason members of Naval Special Warfare are trying to locate you tonight? Naomi hesitated before answering. Probably because I missed a memorial call. Reeves frowned immediately. A memorial call? Naomi nodded softly. One of Elijah's teammates passed away last week. The storm seemed quieter for a moment after she said her brother's name again. Mercer folded his arms against the rain. Elijah Carter, he said carefully, recognizing it now. Black Viper team? Naomi looked surprised. You knew him? Mercer shook his head once. No, ma'am. But everyone in military circles heard about what happened during that extraction mission overseas. Reeves looked between them both, confusion building across his face. What extraction mission? Mercer glanced toward him briefly. Your traffic stop just became a lot more complicated. Reeves stared at him. What are you talking about? Mercer lowered his voice slightly. Naomi Carter's brother saved 6 operators during an ambush before he died. Reeves looked back toward Naomi instinctively. Rainwater slid down her cheeks, but she did not react to the story at all. It felt less like praise and more like an old wound she had carried too long already. Mercer continued quietly. After his death, his unit created a private foundation for military families. He looked directly at Naomi now. You run that foundation, do not you? Naomi nodded once. I help where I can. Reeves stared at the stacks of folders inside her car again. Suddenly the names written across the envelope no longer looked suspicious. They looked personal, important, human. Mercer stepped closer toward Reeves and lowered his voice further. You need to end this, stop. Reeves frowned. Why? Mercer looked at him carefully. Because right now half the veteran community in this state probably knows she is missing. Naomi finally spoke again, her voice calm despite the storm around them. I am not missing. I was just delayed. Mercer gave a small respectful nod toward her. Ma'am, with all due respect, people tend to notice when you stop answering calls. Reeves shifted uncomfortably beside his patrol car. The confidence he had carried at the beginning of the stop was slowly disappearing beneath the rain. He looked again at Naomi's worn hospital scrubs, the paper bags filled with supplies, the folders stacked carefully in the back seat, and the folded flag held tightly against her chest like something sacred. Nothing about her matched the assumptions he had formed 30 minutes earlier. Then suddenly Mercer's radio crackled loudly. Sergeant Mercer, be advised. Multiple black SUVs just entered county roads heading toward your location. Mercer closed his eyes briefly, as if hoping he heard wrong. How many vehicles? Static hissed for a second. Then dispatch answered quietly. 6 so far. And sir, they are all government plates. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Rain continued pouring across the empty Georgia highway while the words government plates echoed in the silence like a warning no one knew how to answer. Sergeant Colin Mercer slowly lowered the radio from his mouth and looked toward Naomi Carter again. She stood beside her car holding the folded military flag close against her chest, her expression calm but tired, as though this kind of attention embarrassed her more than frightened her. Officer Daniel Reeves, however, no longer looked calm at all. He stared down the dark stretch of road beyond the trees where faint headlights had already begun appearing through the rain. 6 pairs, then 8, then more. White beams cutting silently through the storm. Reeves swallowed hard. You have got to be kidding me, he muttered. Mercer did not answer immediately. His eyes stayed fixed on the approaching lights. Reeves, he finally said quietly, tell me exactly how this stop started. Reeves shifted awkwardly beneath the flashing patrol lights. Broken taillight. Mercer glanced toward Naomi's car instinctively. The taillights were both glowing bright red through the rain. Mercer looked back at Reeves slowly. Reeves immediately realized the mistake. I thought one was out earlier, he said quickly. Mercer's face tightened. You thought? Naomi lowered her eyes toward the wet pavement and said nothing. That silence somehow made everything worse. The approaching convoy grew closer now, engines low and steady beneath the storm. Black SUVs emerged one by one from the darkness like shadows moving through water. No sirens. No flashing lights. Just controlled movement. Deliberate. Precise. Reeves felt tension crawl slowly into his chest as the vehicles lined the shoulder of the highway behind the patrol cars. Doors opened almost simultaneously. Men stepped out wearing dark jackets, jeans, boots, and ball caps pulled low against the rain. At first glance they looked ordinary. But nothing about the way they moved felt ordinary. Every step was calm, measured, a kind of quiet discipline Reeves recognized instantly without understanding why it unsettled him so deeply. Naomi looked up for the first time since the vehicles arrived. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. One of the men, tall with gray at his temples and rainwater running down the collar of his jacket, walked forward through the storm until he stopped several feet from Naomi. You okay, kid? He asked softly. Naomi nodded once. I am fine, Marcus. Reeves froze slightly at the name. Marcus Reed, the dying veteran she had mentioned earlier. The man standing in front of them looked tired and pale beneath the highway lights, but there was still something unmistakably powerful about his presence. Mercer straightened immediately. Even he seemed to recognize him. Marcus looked toward the folded flag in Naomi's arms and gave a faint smile. Still carrying Elijah with you everywhere? Naomi looked down at the flag gently. Somebody should. The other men behind Marcus remained silent in the rain, watching carefully but without aggression. Reeves noticed something then that made his stomach tighten further. Several of them wore silver trident pins clipped discreetly to their jackets. Navy SEAL insignias. Real ones. Mercer stepped forward cautiously. Sir, he began respectfully. We were not informed. Marcus raised one hand politely. Nobody is in trouble here, Sergeant. His voice stayed calm. Controlled. We just lost contact with Naomi during the memorial call and wanted to make sure she was safe. Reeves looked between the men again. There were far more than 6 SUVs now. More vehicles had quietly arrived behind the first group, their headlights glowing through sheets of rain across the highway shoulder. Naomi finally looked toward Reeves again. Not with anger, not with triumph, just sadness. "I told you people notice when veterans stop hearing from me," she said softly. Reeves opened his mouth, but before he could respond, another man stepped out from one of the SUVs carrying a small folded photograph protected carefully inside a plastic sleeve. He walked directly toward Naomi and handed it to her without speaking. Naomi's face changed the instant she saw it. Her breath caught quietly. Reeves glanced toward the photograph and realized it showed a younger Naomi standing beside a group of Navy SEALs in desert uniforms, all smiling around a military helicopter beneath a burning sunset. Rain continued falling steadily across the highway, softer now, almost gentle against the black SUVs lined silently along the roadside. The flashing patrol lights no longer felt dominant beneath the growing presence surrounding them. Officer Daniel Reeves stood beside his cruiser without speaking while Naomi Carter stared down at the photograph in her hands. The image looked worn from years of being carried. A younger version of her stood between 6 Navy SEALs beneath the fading orange light of a desert sunset somewhere overseas. Her smile in the picture looked different from the woman standing in the storm now. Lighter, untouched by grief. Marcus Reed stepped beside her slowly, his breathing slightly uneven beneath the cold night air. "Elijah kept that photo in his locker," he said quietly. Naomi brushed rainwater from the edge of the plastic sleeve with careful fingers. "I remember that day." Her voice almost disappeared beneath the sound of rain. He said none of you smiled enough. A few of the men standing behind Marcus lowered their heads with faint smiles that lasted only a second before fading again. Reeves watched the exchange carefully, confusion slowly giving way to something heavier inside his chest. Respect. Regret. Maybe both. Sergeant Colin Mercer remained near the patrol cars, visibly tense but silent. Nobody here was acting aggressive. Nobody had threatened anyone. Yet somehow the quiet dignity of the people standing in the rain felt more powerful than shouting ever could. Naomi finally handed the photograph back gently. "You should keep it dry," she told the man who brought it. He nodded respectfully before stepping back toward the others. Marcus looked toward the boxes and folders stacked inside Naomi's car. "You were still making deliveries tonight?" Naomi gave a tired nod. 3 families left. Marcus shook his head softly, almost in disbelief. "You work 16-hour shifts at the hospital and still drive halfway across the state for people." Naomi shrugged slightly. "Somebody checked on us after Elijah died." The words landed heavily in the night air. Reeves lowered his eyes toward the wet pavement. Naomi continued quietly, almost speaking more to herself than anyone else. "Most families disappear after the funeral. Calls stop. Flags get folded away in closets. People move on." She tightened her grip on the folded flag against her chest. "But grief does not move on." Marcus looked at her carefully for a long moment before answering. "Neither does loyalty." Silence settled again. The storm had begun easing now, leaving only a steady drizzle drifting through the highway lights. Somewhere far beyond the trees, thunder rolled weaker than before. Reeves finally stepped forward slowly. Every pair of eyes shifted toward him immediately. He looked uncomfortable standing there beneath the weight of so many quiet stares. "Ms. Carter," he began carefully, "I think maybe this situation got misunderstood." Naomi looked at him calmly. There was no anger in her face. Somehow that made speaking even harder for him. Reeves cleared his throat. "I made assumptions tonight." Naomi said nothing. Reeves glanced briefly toward the men standing behind her. "I did not know who you were." Marcus responded before Naomi could. "That is the problem, officer." His voice stayed calm, but every word landed with quiet precision. Too many people only offer respect after they hear a title or see a uniform. Reeves looked down immediately. Nobody argued with Marcus because nobody needed to. Naomi stepped forward slightly before the silence became too heavy. "Marcus," she said softly, "please." Marcus exhaled through his nose and nodded once, backing away again. Naomi turned back toward Reeves. Rainwater glistened against her hospital badge under the highway lights. "You asked me earlier why black people get nervous during traffic stops," she said quietly. Reeves swallowed hard but did not answer. Naomi looked out toward the endless dark highway stretching beyond the storm. "Because too often we have to prove we matter before people treat us gently." The words hung in the cold night air long after she finished speaking. Reeves could not look away from her face anymore. And for the first time since the stop began, he finally understood that the woman standing in front of him had never been asking for special treatment at all. Only basic humanity. The rain finally began to break apart into thin, drifting mist as dawn slowly approached over the Georgia highway. The flashing patrol lights still painted the wet asphalt in red and blue waves, but the tension from earlier had changed into something quieter now. Heavier. More human. Officer Daniel Reeves stood beside his cruiser with his soaked uniform clinging cold against his shoulders, while Naomi Carter carefully placed the folded military flag back onto the passenger seat of her car. Around them, the men who had arrived in black SUVs remained calm and silent, their presence steady like a wall built from loyalty instead of anger. Sergeant Colin Mercer leaned against the hood of his patrol unit, speaking quietly into his radio, trying to calm whatever chaos was already spreading back at the station. Reeves glanced toward the group again and noticed something he had missed before. Several of the men looked exhausted. One carried an oxygen tube beneath his jacket collar. Another walked with a stiff limp that became obvious whenever he shifted his weight. These were not men trying to intimidate anyone. They were men carrying years of sacrifice and silence. Marcus Reed stepped closer to Naomi and nodded toward the boxes in her back seat. You still planning to finish the deliveries? Naomi looked at the clock glowing on her dashboard. The Henderson family will already be awake. Marcus gave a tired laugh under his breath. You have not changed at all. Naomi smiled faintly for the first time that night. Neither did Elijah. At the sound of her brother's name, the men standing nearby grew quieter. Reeves watched their reactions carefully now, slowly realizing something important. These men were not protecting Naomi because of power or status. They were here because she mattered to them personally, deeply. She had become part of their lives in the same way soldiers become family after surviving pain together. Reeves lowered his eyes toward the wet pavement again. The assumptions he made earlier now felt ugly inside his chest. He remembered the suspicion in his voice, the way his hand hovered near his weapon, the way he questioned her as though kindness from someone like Naomi automatically required explanation. He looked back toward her standing beside the old Honda Accord loaded with grief counseling folders and care packages for military families. Nothing about her demanded recognition. She simply kept showing up for people long after the rest of the world stopped paying attention to them. Mercer finally stepped away from the radio and approached slowly. Chief wants everyone back at the station, he said carefully. Marcus shook his head politely. No need. Mercer looked surprised. Sir. Marcus glanced toward Reeves briefly before answering. Nobody came here for revenge. The words settled hard in the cold morning air. Reeves looked up immediately. Marcus continued calmly. Naomi has spent years teaching grieving families not to let pain turn into bitterness. He looked toward Naomi with quiet respect. We are not about to dishonor that now. Naomi crossed her arms against the chilly wind as dawn light slowly began softening the horizon beyond the trees. People make mistakes, she said quietly. Reeves looked at her almost incredulously. After tonight, you still believe that? Naomi met his eyes directly. I work with broken people every day, Officer Reeves. Veterans, widows, parents, survivors. She paused briefly. If I stopped believing people could learn from their worst moments, I could not do my job anymore. Reeves felt something tighten painfully in his throat. Nobody had yelled at him tonight. Nobody threatened him. Somehow that mercy felt far more difficult to carry. Marcus looked toward the sky where the storm clouds were finally breaking apart. Elijah used to say the strongest people are the ones who stay gentle after life gives them every reason not to. Naomi lowered her gaze quietly after hearing her brother's words repeated back to her. The highway had grown almost completely silent now except for distant rainwater dripping from pine branches onto the roadside. Reeves stood there beneath the fading patrol lights, realizing that everything he thought strength looked like had just changed in front of him. Dawn finally broke across the Georgia highway in pale shades of blue and gray, washing away the harshness of the storm little by little. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving water dripping softly from pine branches and highway signs, while low fog rolled across the empty road in slow waves. Naomi Carter stood beside her Honda Accord, adjusting the boxes in her back seat one by one with careful hands. Around her, the black SUVs remained parked quietly along the shoulder, their engines off now, their headlights dark. The men who arrived during the storm no longer looked like an intimidating force. In the growing daylight, they simply looked tired. Human. Some leaned against vehicle doors, sipping coffee from paper cups. Others stood silently watching the sunrise spread across the wet pavement. Officer Daniel Reeves remained near his patrol car, unable to shake the heaviness sitting in his chest. Everything about the night replayed differently in his mind now. The suspicion in his voice, the assumptions in his questions, the way Naomi stayed calm, even when he gave her every reason not to trust him. Sergeant Colin Mercer finally approached Reeves quietly. "You all right?" Reeves stared toward Naomi for a long moment before answering. No, Mercer nodded slowly as if he expected that answer already. Reeves rubbed both hands across his face, exhaustion settling into his voice. "I thought I was being cautious." Mercer looked toward Naomi too. "Maybe you were." Reeves shook his head immediately. "No, I was seeing a threat before I saw a person." The honesty in his own words hit him harder than he expected. Mercer stayed silent beside him while morning light reflected softly across the soaked highway. A few feet away, Marcus Reed coughed into a handkerchief before carefully lowering himself against the side of an SUV to rest. Naomi noticed instantly and walked over with the quiet urgency of someone deeply used to taking care of other people. She handed him a bottle of water and adjusted the collar of his jacket against the cold morning air without making a scene about it. Marcus smiled faintly. "You still mother everybody." Naomi shook her head with a tired smile. "Somebody has to keep stubborn men alive." Reeves watched the interaction carefully. Nothing Naomi did looked performative. She cared for people naturally, instinctively, even after spending the entire night standing in the rain being questioned by strangers. That realization sat painfully inside him. After several quiet minutes, Reeves finally walked toward her slowly. The conversations around the vehicles softened almost immediately as people noticed him approaching. Naomi looked up from closing the trunk of her car. Reeves stopped a few feet away, uncertainty visible across his face for the first time all night. "Miss Carter," he began quietly, "I owe you an apology." Naomi remained still, listening. Reeves glanced briefly at the folded military flag resting safely inside the car before looking back at her. "I judged you before I knew anything about you." His voice tightened slightly. "And the truth is, even if you were nobody important, I still should have treated you with more respect." The highway grew silent around them. No radios. No engines. Just wind moving softly through wet pine trees. Naomi studied his face carefully, almost as if deciding whether his words came from guilt or genuine understanding. Finally she spoke. "Do you know what veterans fear most after coming home?" Reeves shook his head slowly. "Being forgotten," Naomi answered. "Being looked at like they no longer matter." She rested one hand lightly against the edge of the folded flag. "That fear does not only belong to soldiers." Reeves lowered his eyes immediately. Naomi continued softly. "People do not always remember exact words, Officer Reeves. But they remember how safe or unsafe someone made them feel." The truth in her voice landed quietly but deeply. Reeves nodded once, unable to argue with any of it. After a long silence, Naomi reached into the passenger seat and pulled out one of the paper diner bags she had prepared earlier that night. She handed it toward him gently. Reeves looked confused. "What is this?" "Breakfast," Naomi said simply. "You have probably been standing in the rain for hours too." Reeves stared at the bag in stunned silence while steam from fresh coffee drifted softly into the cold morning air between them. Officer Daniel Reeves stood motionless with the warm diner bag still in his hands as steam drifted slowly upward into the cold morning air. For a moment, he could not understand why the simple gesture unsettled him more than everything else that had happened that night. Naomi Carter had every reason to leave angry. Every reason to humiliate him in front of the men standing silently beside the black SUVs. Yet somehow she was still offering kindness like it cost her nothing. The sunrise spread gradually across the Georgia highway now, turning the wet pavement gold beneath fading patrol lights. Around them, the storm finally felt gone. Marcus Reed pushed himself upright from the side of the SUV and glanced toward the horizon. "Sun is coming up," he said quietly. Naomi nodded and closed the trunk of her Honda carefully. "The Henderson family lives another 40 miles south," she said. "If I leave now, I can still make breakfast before their kids wake up." Marcus smiled faintly and shook his head with admiration. "You never stop, do you?" Naomi adjusted the sleeves of her damp hospital jacket. Neither did Elijah. The men around her lowered their heads slightly at the mention of her brother again. Even after all these years, his absence still moved through them like something living. Reeves watched quietly as one of the former SEALs stepped forward and placed a small hand over his heart toward Naomi before returning silently to the group. Then another did the same. No speeches, no dramatic gestures, just respect, pure and quiet. Reeves suddenly understood what had truly brought all these men onto a dark highway before sunrise. Not fear, not anger, loyalty. The kind earned slowly through years of compassion nobody else bothered to notice. Sergeant Colin Mercer finally checked his watch and exhaled. "Chief is probably losing his mind by now," he muttered. A few soft laughs moved through the group for the first time all night. The tension had broken completely now, leaving behind only exhaustion and reflection. Naomi opened her driver's side door before pausing suddenly. She looked back toward Reeves one last time. "Officer." Reeves straightened immediately. Naomi studied him carefully beneath the pale morning light. "Next time you stop someone on a road like this, remember something." Reeves nodded silently. Naomi glanced toward the folded military flag resting on her passenger seat. "Most people are carrying battles you cannot see." The words settled into the quiet morning air with gentle finality. Reeves lowered his eyes briefly before answering. "I will remember." Naomi gave a small nod, then climbed into the driver's seat. The old Honda started with a tired engine hum while mist drifted low across the highway shoulder. One by one, the men near the SUVs stepped aside to clear the road ahead of her. Marcus Reed raised 2 fingers quietly toward the windshield in farewell. Naomi smiled faintly and pulled slowly back onto the highway, her taillights glowing red against the morning fog as she disappeared into the distance carrying folded flags, grief counseling folders, and paper bags filled with breakfast for families still learning how to survive loss. Nobody spoke for several long seconds after she left. The road suddenly felt strangely empty without her there. Reeves stood beside his cruiser staring at the disappearing taillights until they vanished completely beyond the pine trees. Then he looked down at the warm coffee still resting inside the diner bag she gave him. The side of the paper cup had a handwritten note in black marker. Simple, small, almost easy to miss. "Be safe out there, officer." Reeves read the words twice while morning sunlight slowly spread across the wet highway around him. Somewhere behind him, engines from the black SUVs started quietly one after another. The men began leaving without ceremony, disappearing back onto the road the same way they arrived. Silent, disciplined, loyal. Within minutes, the highway looked ordinary again. Just another empty stretch of road beneath a clear Georgia sunrise. But Officer Daniel Reeves remained standing there long after everyone else had gone, holding a cup of coffee that somehow weighed heavier than anything he had carried before, while the distant sound of Naomi Carter's fading engine disappeared softly into the morning light.